Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to Star Wars Lads for this week's live stream and Q&A. Hopefully, you're all having a great Tuesday so far. Today, we're going to talk about all the latest in Star Wars news and take your guys' questions. Anything you'd like to discuss tonight, leave it in the chat. First come, first serve, as always. And we have the rare, fairly empty chat room right now. So, those of you who are watching, send in your chats. You will most likely get on the stream tonight. We're going to go about an hour and a half to 2 hours. We're going to be discussing all the latest in Star Wars news, including the biggest story, which we did cover with a trailer reaction, which is Star Wars Visions Volume Three's trailer dropped last Thursday. We reacted to it and broke down some of the things we saw, but we're going to do a little bit deeper dive on Star Wars Visions Volume 3 today, talking about all the different episodes, the official synopsis that were released for each of the episodes, as well as which studios are doing what, and give you a little bit of a preview of that. Visions Volume 3 comes out in less than a month. So, this is our next Star Wars project we're going to be seeing on Disney Plus. And I'm pretty excited after having seen the trailer. So, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the fact that Ahsoka Season 2 is wrapping this week. They are almost done with production, and we have some new details about Ahsoka that have come out recently. So, we're going to discuss that. We have a few other stories to cover, but as always, your guys' questions are the thing that we love to answer most on these streams. So send in your chats into the chat room. It is first come, first serve. The way to bypass the chat queue is to either send in a super chat, which supports our channel, helps us out greatly, and you guarantee to get your chat on the stream tonight. The other way you can do it is to join our Patreon or YouTube membership programs. With the $5 tier, you get priority chat access, and you just have to do it once a month. So you pay that $5 fee and you get priority chat access, as well as a variety of other great perks that you can check out in either our Patreon page or our YouTube membership pages. So make sure you check those out as well. Make sure you like the video if you haven't. Right now, we have more people watching than have liked the video. So it really helps us out if you like the video, and subscribe if you are new. If you're joining us or watching us on replay for the first time, make sure you subscribe. We do this every Tuesday. We'd love to have you a part of our streams, hearing your guys' voice and letting us know what you guys think of all the stuff going on in the world of Star Wars, as well as some other stuff. Whatever you guys would like to talk about, we get into comics and TV and film and all that type of stuff on these streams. So it's a lot of fun to discuss not just Star Wars, but really everything in the world of pop culture every Tuesday. So if that's something that sounds right for you, make sure you check out our streams every week. All right, let's get on to our first piece of news as people continue to kind of trickle into the chat room. And that is that Star Wars Visions Volume 3 has had its first trailer, which dropped last week on the 26th. We did get the official release date, which we already knew, October 29th is when Volume 3 comes out, as well as synopses for all the episodes that are coming from Volume 3. Now, we were already aware of the studios that were producing episodes for Volume 3, but we didn't have full synopses yet of every single episode. So we did know we are getting 3 sequels. We're getting a sequel to The Duel, we're getting a sequel to The Ninth Jedi that will take place maybe somewhere before the entire show that's coming out next year. And we are also getting a sequel to The Village Bride. The trailer that came out showed footage of everything, and we broke down some of our favorites, some of the surprise animation styles we saw. I know, particularly for us, there was a 3D animated episode that was very colorful and bright, really stood out amongst, all the flashing bright images you see in the trailer. That one looked pretty cool. Standouts as always, Ninth Jedi and The Duel look really, really good. The Village Bride, look, I'm excited for that as a big fan of Village Bride. There was also kind of the mech episode where you have this girl who kind of combines herself into like an X-Wing with also her droid, and it's a cool, like, Gundam Power Rangers type thing going on there, which is really, really cool. They've got that. We saw a few clips from the Black episode, the one that's about the stormtrooper that's surviving. And there were a couple cool, kind of short, brief, but trippy shots that you see from there. One that's kind of black and white, as well as another one that has kind of an orange hue to it and looks really neat as well. So there's a lot to see in that Visions trailer. And I'm just going to pass it over to you real quick, Sonic, for your thoughts on just Star Wars Visions Volume 3 in general. You kind of refresh the audience for those people who didn't watch our trailer reaction, what your thoughts overall on the trailer was. And then we'll come back after and we'll kind of break down each episode and which ones are from which studios. So, what were your thoughts overall now, a few days removed from the Star Wars Visions trailer?
I think first of all, I was pretty surprised to see that of all things that this trailer would drop just like a couple of days after The Mandalorian Grogu. I know a lot of, like, especially TV shows sort of things, you kinda expect it to have, like, a big marketing blitz for a couple of weeks, and then it just relaxes, right? And obviously, we were all wondering about this on our streams, on our video clips and all, like, "Hey, when's Mandalorian Grogu gonna come out?" Obviously, the whole Kimmel situation happened. It wrapped up super quickly too, but I figured, okay, Visions doesn't necessarily need to stick to its original scheduling like it was rumored to be, where, like, first Mandalorian Grogu, and then a week later, right? Visions coming out just, like, 2 days later was very surprising, so that kinda threw me for a loop there. I think the Mandalorian Grogu trailer has performed fairly well. I think it's 9,000,000 or so, so maybe they were just felt confident, like, "Hey, it's been a pretty dead period, almost like everywhere across Star Wars YouTube, across also Star Wars social medias. Why don't we just give it like a double punch here, like a 1-2?" So I think that's why it came so quickly. Even if it was adjusted, I think they would have punched Visions season two, sorry, Visions Volume 3 out another week if they were like, oh no, Mandalorian Grogu needs that staying power. But maybe their internal analytics are showing all the right things for them, that this was already working out great for Mandalorian Grogu. It can only be like a nice feedback loop for them. So, it was a pretty surprising decision for me. But I enjoyed the trailer quite a bit. I think Volume 2 was just really poorly marketed in general. You would think expanding to all these worldwide studios, right? Not just the Japanese anime studios, that would have like a little bit more of a push around, and maybe there was around the world, but Visions Volume 2 just didn't really have any energy in a lot of its trailers. It was more just showing like, look how different every studio looks, right? And Visions Volume 3 has just come out with like, "Hey, let's make a really cool trailer, everything, with that's kinetic, that has a lot of motion." A huge emphasis on mimicking Volume One's whole look. Obviously starts off with the duel sequel right there. I mean, the duel is still the visual representation, right, of like a traveling Ronin, right? Samurai-esque imagery, everything that's inspired Star Wars originally with Hidden Fortress and all that. That's what really sold Visions Volume 1, even if arguably you can say the duel is not the best received, right? We've seen, if anything, that the duel has actually kinda taken a step back after the Ronin novel came out. People were not very happy with that. They didn't find the short anything more than like a very cool, like, cell animation style sort of thing. And then the book, they're like, it's not connected to any sort of canon, right? It's not like it's trying to do that, sure, but it just doesn't seem as, like, cool and strong anymore. So I thought it was a pretty strange choice, honestly, to kinda come out with the duel again, but I think it's just, like, how they are with The Mandalorian Grogu. Reminds you of how energetic everything was just a couple years ago on Disney Plus before this whole streaming bubble collapsed. So I think personally, I was expecting them to be pushing more The Ninth Jedi. I think the fact that The Ninth Jedi is getting its own TV series, right, spinoff, I would hope that they'd be like, "This is like a nice way, like an entry point between this and Volume 1 to, like, get yourself ready for our new TV show." But I guess they're still trying to honor that Visions is its own thing, that Ninth Jedi is just part of it still. And of course, saw glimpses of the Village Bride with a little bit more of an action-packed sequel there. So very curious how fans like myself of that are gonna take to something a little bit more dynamic as opposed to very internal focused. I think the thing that you and I both are, like, pretty surprised by, especially with what little that we were getting about Visions Volume 3 for the last few months, is just how scattered and very short the little glimpses are of the Black anime short, right? That's the one that at every convention, they've been talking about like it's a psychological breakdown of the past, present, future, all happening to this stormtrooper during these battles and all that. And even in this trailer, you almost have to catch it. Like you can see in our breakdown trailer, we had to like look back, be like, oh yeah, that maybe is a clip. That might maybe is a cut of that. So I don't know if it's because it's like a seemingly more heavier, more mature, more darker story that they're gonna kinda tell there, and that doesn't necessarily have, like, bright anime style, like, fun imagery, fun color to it. Maybe they're like, "Let's hold back on that." Maybe that's more for the critical darlings, the critical reviews that'll come out later once it's actually released. So, I don't know. It seems like there's been a lot of separate things going on. Visions Volume 3 seems more like it's just trying to be Volume 1 again, remind you that, "Hey, not only are we trying to get back to those vibes of, like, having truly only Japanese studios involved in the animations here, but we're trying to make sequels to a lot of your favorite shorts, and whatever else comes in between, like, it should feel like the same energy, the same pace, same explosion of, the East meets West, where animation and everything can kinda combine and be ruled together." So I'm excited by the trailer. I think it took a couple of, very safe steps, right? It's very similar in a lot of ways to the Mandalorian Grogu that way. I'm just a little surprised at what little that we were getting about Visions Volume 3 up to this point was actually quite minimized in this trailer for the most part. So, yeah, I mean, besides all those points, just knowing that we're getting like a 3D animated and very high FPS, high rate, um, uh, of, motion when it comes to this 3D anime look. This kinda stood out to us, or it still fits in very well with the visuals without necessarily being like, "Oh, this looks like something from volume 2," where they had a little bit more of that 3D animation. It feels like they're doing a proper 3D anime, so I think that might be, like, the new thing that stood out to me the most, but everything else, I'm like, "Oh, okay, it's a start." I don't know if it's necessarily the one I would have gone for, but if you're trying to aim for just like energy, kineticism, that's what volume 1 of Visions was, guys. Just remember that. Then I think it hit all its right beats.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think Volume 1 is iconic in its own way. It doesn't quite have the viewership of a lot of other Disney Plus Star Wars projects, but it does have like a visual significance to a lot of people when they think of Star Wars Visions, they think of Volume 1. And so this trailer does a good job of just getting you back to thinking about Visions that way. It's in a lot of ways makes you feel like you haven't seen Vision since 2021, even though there was a 2023 season because season 2 was so different. And so I think this gets you back to where you need to be. I would be shocked if season 4 or 5 or 6 of Visions is anything but anime because I think in general anime is just too popular and it just coincides with Visions. If we want to do another Star Wars animation show that has other animation studios around it. Maybe they should call it something else and we can get other studios to work on Star Wars animation. But for now, I think this is going to be what Visions is, and Visions is going to stay this way. And I think the trailer does a good job of getting you into that vibe. Will it win over any new people who are not into Star Wars Visions? No, the episodes will have to speak for themselves in that way. They'll have to come out and be something that everybody's talking about. You got to see this, you got to see that. The way some episodes were last time. And I think they're consumable enough to where they can grow. And I think probably Disney's hope is that they're shockingly pretty positive numbers for Visions in 2021 weren't an anomaly of the streaming period of 2020 to 2022 where it really was everything they wanted it and more to be with all of the theaters shut down. That Visions does have a level because of its ties to anime, and that through that they can boost viewership and maybe bring back some people who aren't as into anime or gave anime a shot because of Visions, but then didn't watch season 2. They can get those types of people to come back, enjoy season 3, and then be excited for their first full anime series, which is coming out next year, obviously. So that's a big key to their success. And I think this really hones in on, those nostalgia waves from season 1, getting you back interested in all the vibes of season 1, and it's showing you there's a variety of action and maybe a little bit more trippy stuff, some more visually different stuff. There's a little bit of everything, but your the things you remember Star Wars Visions for are still here, and you're still going to get those in season 3, unlike you did in season 2. So that's where I think they are going specifically with Star Wars Visions. Let's talk about the episodes, and then we'll get to some of your guys' questions here. We have Ryan Smith who asked an interesting question I definitely want to get to. So, Ryan, we'll get to your question here in a few minutes. Star Wars discussions. Did not like season 2, but hopefully you're on board for season 3 Star Wars discussion. Does it look better to you for season 3? Does it look more like you wanted it to be from season 1? Let us know that in the chat. But let's get to the specific episodes, and then we'll get to your guys' questions here. So, obviously, the first one you see in the trailer and the first one that we have information about is the dual payback. So, in the dual payback, the plot synopsis is: with the help of some unexpected allies, Ronin faces off against his greatest foe, a twisted Jedi known as the Grandmaster who is bent on revenge. This one will be directed by Takanobu Mizuno, and it is from Kamikaze Douga again, plus the studio Anima. Kamikaze Douga is mostly known in Western audiences for the Batman Ninja movies that they've done. Those have been kind of some people really love those, some people really hate them. I enjoyed Batman Ninja for what it was. I feel like more anime only fans don't like it as much as like just general Batman fans. But I enjoyed what it was. I didn't watch the second one. But yeah, they are getting that from the duel. Next up is The Song of Four Wings, where a princess turned rebel protects a child from the might of the Empire on a snowbound planet. That's from Project Studio Q. Studio Q is known for few things. They did work on season 3 of Visions. That's it. Basically, I have kind of never heard of anything else they've done. They did an Evangelion little shorts here, but that's about it. And so that's a new studio for Visions. We'll see how that one goes. It's directed by Hiroyasu Kobayashi. And then you have production IG with the Ninth Jedi. They did the Ninth Jedi last time. Ninth Jedi Child of Hope. Production IG is probably the most famous of the studios working on this. They did Attack on Titan seasons 1, 2, and 3, as well as the final season. They did Haikyuu, Vinland Saga, Psycho Pass. So they've done kind of anything and everything when it comes to some of the most famous anime around. They are one of the most prolific studios, and they will be tackling the Ninth Jedi. So, very excited to see what they have next here, and if it does connect and build into that show, it would be awesome to just get like a little teaser as like a post credits thing on the Ninth Jedi episode for the series, because I think you might as well just kind of build that hype, connect the two. That would be really, really cool. Hopefully, they do something like that. The synopsis for the Ninth Jedi episode is: pursued by Jedi hunters and blasted adrift into space, Kara encounters a seemingly abandoned ship tended to by a mysterious droid. That one is directed by Naoshi Shiotani. And then the fourth episode, we'll talk about the first four here, and then we'll get into the last few. The fourth episode is Bounty Hunters by Wit Studio. Wit Studio is notable for also co-producing Attack on Titan seasons 1, 2, and 3. They also have done Spy Family, Vinland Saga, Spy Family season 2. So they've done a lot of stuff that's currently very, very popular as well. So that's pretty exciting to get a single episode from them. The synopsis of that one is: a rogue bounty hunter takes on a job for a shady industrialist that has unexpected consequences for her and her droid. So out of those four, Sonic, which one sounds the most interesting for you? You've got obviously two returning ones, the Ninth Jedi Child of Hope and the Dual Payback, but you also have the Song of Four Winds and Bounty Hunters, both from varying studios. Like the Song of Four Winds, Project Studio Q, haven't done that much. Wit Studio, very iconic in the world of anime. So which shorts here stand out to you the most of those four?
I mean, I think I made it clear before, I'm not, like, the biggest fan of the Duel, so I am looking forward to what Duel Payback will do differently. It seems like it is a continuing story, right? So we've seen the amputee Twi'lek and her crazy new cybernetic lightsaber attachments and all. So that plus like the Wookiees and the Ewoks and everything. I'm like, okay, you're expanding the world into a little bit more familiar Star Wars stuff for me. Let me see what you can do with the feudalistic Japan setting, right? I think last time there was a good enough twist, but I'm also just very curious, like, will this be a story that it seemingly references Ronin or at least connects to the chronology of what happens with Ronin, right? I'm not quite sure. I've never read it. I don't really have much intention to, but I think that I'm gonna give it a lot more of a chance this time just because it's been quite a while. It's been 4 years, really. Uh, Obviously, the Ninth Jedi one, I'm really hoping it's a nice like springboard into what we're seeing here with the show. I think this is a way to kinda introduce that robot character that we see hugging our main character, right? I think that's probably the one taking care of this abandoned ship. Now I'm wondering maybe the shots of, like, the different big ships that we've seen outside are actually Night Jedi instead of something else, but maybe not. I'm not quite sure there. I will say, though, the Wit Studio one is probably the one that gets me pretty excited, and it's because of, like, the maturity and themes that they've handled with a show like Vinland, especially with Attack on Titan. This is seemingly pretty bland, like, just talking about, industrialists and, like, a droid and, like, investigations, but that basic log line, I think, can really carry quite a bit for a heavier short that might be, like, deeper into the belly of, like, an imperial coded civilization that's been, like, rotting from the inside out and all that, so I'd love to see something like that. I'd love to see them kinda really push it there, go a little darker. We obviously know that black is gonna be the short that is gonna probably be the most crazy, weirdest one, but still, I wanna see if other studios are willing to take a bit more of a risk, seemingly with this possibly being the close of Visions here, right? I don't expect there to necessarily be a volume 4 now that we have a Night Jedi spin-off series starting here, but if this is the end, I want them to go for a little bit of a bigger swing here. I don't want it to be like La Pinocho and all that stuff from season 1 and, like, Toby one where and Tatooine Rhapsody where it's like, it's cute, it's chibi, it's fun, but let us, like, actually have short stories, short films be made here instead of just, "Here's, like, a little fun little sandbox that we've been gifted, and we're just gonna, like, play around with the character models." I want them to really push the story, and I think returning to anime studios, especially even in just 4 years, just how vastly different the anime world is now. We've had Demon Slayer in theaters break record after record, just like it did Mugen Train. Infinite Castle is just blown by it. That scene before its China release. I'm very curious to see just how, like, Western and non-traditional Japanese anime, like, households will, like, look upon volume 3 now that just anime is just even more ubiquitous. So I'm hoping that this is them really saying like, okay, we know that people are just going to give us a chance now because anime has way more coverage. So let us actually tell something serious and like more to our strengths as a studio. And I think they've chosen the all right studio at Wit to really do something like that.
Absolutely, yeah, I think that's the one that I'm most intrigued by out of these 4. I mean, the one I'm most excited for is The Ninth Jedi, I think out of all of them, just because that we know that is carrying into something else. So I'm excited to see how this sets up the world, how we, transition into the series, all of that. But the Wit one should be the most intriguing single episode from these 4 specifically. But the duel, I really like the duel. That was in my top 3 or 4 last time. I enjoyed it a lot. I did not read Ronin either, but I heard it wasn't very good, but I did like the concept behind the duel. So I'm excited for that. And I'm always excited for somebody new to take on Star Wars. Maybe the Song of Four Wings will be something that's completely just different and something we haven't really seen before. The shots in the trailer of that one looked pretty cool. So the last few episodes that we have to talk about here, we have Yuko's Treasure from Kinema Citrus Company. Kinema Citrus is a returning studio from Star Wars Visions Season 1. They've worked on things like Made in Abyss. They've also worked on other projects like Codebreaker, Tokyo Magnitude, and The Rising of the Shield Hero. So things that not necessarily the top tier most famous anime. Made in Abyss is definitely amongst those. But other stuff they've worked on is a little bit more niche. But they are making an episode called Yuko's Treasure. A sheltered orphan teams up with a street rat kid to rescue his droid caregiver and find a long lost treasure. They are also making one called The Lost Ones, which sees a refugee escape a natural disaster, and an incognito F is forced to confront the ghosts of her past with their refugee ship, or when their refugee ship, excuse me, is intercepted by the Empire. So I'm not sure if those are going to tie in together. Kind of sounds like similar stories. Not sure if they're going to tie in together, but that's from Kinema Citrus. We're also getting an episode from Trigger once again. Trigger's returning from season one. They did the twins last season, and Trigger has a very, you know, iconic style. You can recognize them instantly. They've done anime like Cyberpunk Edge Runners, which was really popular here on Netflix, and Kill la Kill also have ties to anime from before their studio started, like Gurren Lagann. So that style is very, very classically Trigger, and you can spot those episodes for sure in that trailer. Their synopsis is: desperate for a quick payday, a smuggler takes a job to rescue a fugitive from the Empire. The final two episodes are The Bird of Paradise from Polygon Pictures. After she is blinded in battle, a hot-headed Jedi Padawan must undergo a series of spiritual trials in order to overcome the temptations of the dark side. Polygon Pictures have done anime such as Agin, as well as the Godzilla movies, the anime Godzilla movies. Personally, I wasn't a huge fan of, but I'm willing to give them another shot here. And the final one is the one we've talked about a few times here on the stream, and that is Black from David Production. A psychedelic battle between past and present, light and dark, and life and death plays out in the haunted psyche of Imperial Stormtrooper who is on the cusp of defeat. David Production is famous for JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. That's probably their most iconic thing they've worked on, but they've worked on a variety of other famous anime. JoJo is very different. Obviously, they're making the anime, not the manga, which is where they get most of the wild source material from. But the anime is still incredibly iconic and very popular in its own right. Out of all those, for sure, Black is the one I'm most interested in seeing. I really enjoy Trigger's style, so I'm looking forward to seeing what they bring this time. I thought the twins, in a lot of ways, was a pretty safe story for them last time. The action was awesome. Story itself was pretty one note and bland, not one of my favorite episodes. But I'm looking forward to seeing if they can do something a little more wild here for this time. But out of those last five, Sonic, which one stood out to you the most?
Again, I think it is gonna be the David one for me, especially because knowing now that they're behind JoJo's. I know, like, yes, source material versus animation style and artistry. There's differences without a doubt, but I'm very curious to see how this will be like an entire flip of a switch for them. I know they have a pretty legendary director behind them, I think, for their shorts, but maybe they're actually taking more cues from
Yes.
him as opposed to what they've done in on TV shows, but yeah, that one's gonna be huge for me. The Trigger one, yeah, I have a lot of the same feelings. I mean, when I heard, Trigger for volume 1, I was like, "Yes, kill la kill, Gurren Lagann, go crazy, go insane." You probably have to tone down, like, the way, Kill la Kill and, Gurren Lagann do their fan service. It's not as, like, it's a little bit more chaotic fan service. That's the best way of putting it to me. But, yeah, I was like, "Yeah, alright," that's I wanna see what they do with the twins, right? I knew they're gonna have to tone it down for Star Wars, especially for the first run, but you don't have to tone down the action, and I just thought the action was like, "That's it?" Like, like, "Sure, cool, whatever," but it felt more like a concept. It didn't really feel again, you should feel like short film. It shouldn't just feel like proof of concepts, which a lot of season 1 did. So I'm hoping this one, like I said before, this might be, the last big blitz that any of these studios get with animation and anime specifically, right? Like, this is old testing for potentially, like, a post episode 9 timeline being filled with full of, like, anime different shows and stuff to fill out characters and backstory and everything. So, hopefully you get a chance again, but this might be it. So if the best way to do it is just to tell a great story. And Trigger has always had great storytelling, despite how chaotic and crazy their stuff has been. So again, that's why Duel just didn't feel right to me. I'm like, this is just you're taking the most iconic of Star Wars iconography, and you're not doing anything fresh or new with it. That was the thing that was really frustrating for me. So hoping for the best this time. I think it can be good. I think the story has enough potential to go there, but when you have a smuggler, empire risking a fugitive, doesn't necessarily line up quite right with maybe like a Kill la Kill, but that does feel very tonally in place where Gurren Lagann starts. So I'm hoping that they can do something really fun here and exciting here and almost be like a pilot of sorts. But really, I am excited for Bird of Paradise. I believe that should be the 3D one. That one we saw a lot of mysticism, a lot of floral like elements. So it looked right. Like, that's the thing, like, I just rewatched, like, Mugen Train. I'm doing, like, a binge to get into Infinity Castle and all that, and even though the TV version has some slight differences, they keep most of the same 3D CGI and all, and it's like, yeah, it's pretty good, but then what I saw in the Visions Volume 3 trailer for the Birds of Paradise, I was like, "Okay, like, that one actually looks right." Like, they've done something different. I don't know if it's because it's in the light or if there's some sort of illumination on the bodies a little bit more, but it really does feel like 2.5D anime, right? Like, you're not taking away from that art style, you're only enhancing it with CGI. It's like you're maybe they're finding a way to do it, and it's always been the issue with anime that anytime they add in CGI elements, it's the frame rate has always been so ridiculously low that it stands out. For this to feel like, yeah, this is just like they had the choice between 2D and slightly more 3D, and it would basically be the same. That's a great sign, and I hope that it looks like that all the way through, and I think especially with all, like, the floral elements, all the trials and tribulations that will be going on here with this character who's blinded of all things, right? I think that will make some very, very cool visuals, almost like the Volume Two's first episode, where it was, like, kinda about, like, that Jedi who's conveying everything through their art and everything. I'm hoping it'll be kinda like that, but, maybe a little bit more refined, a little bit more Japanese in its look.
Yeah, definitely. And it absolutely is going to be that one that's the 3D animated because of just those Godzilla movies and stuff like that. It looks very much so the same style. So I'm looking forward to seeing what they have in store here. I think we've got a good mix of new studios, returning studios, people with some anime prestige more so this time. A lot of the people or a lot of the studios we got last time were kind of like the mid-level of anime studios, and Trigger was pretty popular obviously, and we had Production IG. But outside of that, it was a lot of people trying to kind of prove something, especially to Western audiences, like, hey, come check out our work. And this time we've got a good mix of both. Some more prolific studios coming into the fray here. And on top of that, like you kind of mentioned, this is an audition for who gets the next Star Wars anime. If Ninth Jedi is successful, if the viewership is high, especially if these are co-productions, we don't necessarily know yet the like full extent of how much Disney and Lucasfilm are spending to finance the Ninth Jedi. They might just be saying, hey, you use the Star Wars property, you pay for it all, we'll split the profits for it with you, and it's going to go on our streaming service exclusively. That might be the deal here. Or they might have put 50% into the production. We don't know, because each one of those will show varying different levels of like, will they do more Star Wars anime? If it's just licensing out Star Wars anime and they don't have necessarily any skin in the game in terms of money, then you might see even more Star Wars anime series coming out.
Mhm.
If they need to make a profit, then I think you'll see them wait to see if the Ninth Jedi is a success, which is unfortunate because that will mean we won't hear about whatever is the next Star Wars anime until 2026 or 2027, and that's kind of disappointing. But hopefully, if Vision season 3 is huge, they can have enough, evidence there that hey, maybe we give a dual animated series a try, or we give one of these new properties a try as a series. That would be pretty cool. But what do you guys think of Visions? Let us know in the comments. Those are all the episodes. That's the rundown of the trailer reactions. Let's get to some of your guys' comments here before we get back to some of the rest of the news. We have the Ahsoka news, and then we have the news about James Mangold that I wanted to talk about a little bit too, but Ryan brings that up. So we'll talk about that in conjunction with Ryan's comment here. So Ryan Smith says, between today's news about James Mangold, rumors of a Mandalorian and Grogu trilogy, plus a plethora of other projects in development. What are your predictions for the slate of Star Wars movies through about 2030? So we know we're getting Mandalorian and Grogu next year. We're getting Star Wars Starfighter 2027. What happens to the rest of it? And funny enough, the two things we know are coming out are not amongst the three live action Star Wars films that were announced in 2023, the infamous three. We've had so many press releases and announcements for Star Wars movies, whether it be the Benioff and Weiss series of movies that was announced in 2018, whether it be the Rian Johnson trilogy of movies that was announced in 2017 before The Last Jedi came out, whether it be the Taika Waititi movie, whether it be Rogue Squadron, whether it be the Kevin Feige movie. There have been so many movies announced from Lucasfilm that seem to have no light of day, and that's not even including the trilogy or trinity of movies that we got announced in 2023's Star Wars Celebration Europe, where they brought Dave Filoni, James Mangold, and Daisy Ridley and Charmin Obaid-Chinoy out onto the stage to announce that they're making a Rey movie, a Mandoverse movie capper with Dave Filoni, and a Dawn of the Jedi movie with James Mangold. Well, we've heard a lot. We've talked about Dawn of the Jedi in the past and how there's been a lot of comments about it that generally make you think that it's not happening anytime soon. We've had some things from the writer who said, like, yeah, we're working really hard on it. And once James, gets some time to work on it, or once we approve the script, we're ready to go. Then you have comments from James Mangold, who not only has this movie on the docket, but also has the DC film Swamp Thing. Then today signs a Paramount exclusivity deal where he will be making all his original films via Paramount. Now, I'm not really sure, and I don't think they've announced whether that means that any things he's signed on to do prior to making this exclusivity deal are now cut. I would doubt it, but that does throw a wrinkle in things. And the movie that we heard announced, probably 4 or 5 months ago, High Side with Timothy Chalamet, who he just worked on The Complete Unknown with and got an Oscar nomination for directing for Complete Unknown, the Bob Dylan film. He's making a heist movie called The High Side with Timothy Chalamet. And so that's seemingly his next project. Where does Dawn of the Jedi fit in? Where does Swamp Thing fit in? And DC and Star Wars both kind of feel like at this point, a lot of things are up in the air. A lot of those big announcements, I believe DC's was also 2023. Those big announcements that they announced, all those things, are any of them really going to happen? Or in what time frame are all these things going on? So I appreciate the question, Ryan, because it is one that just seems like we really have no idea. So personally, my prediction is obviously the two we have: 2026 Mandalorian and Grogu, 2027 Starfighter. I'm going to say 2028, they don't have a movie come out that year. I think we'll take a year off. And then I think 2029, if all goes according to plan, we are going to get the Mandalorian and Grogu 2. And then Dawn of the Jedi to me is our 2030 movie, barring Starfighter also being a huge success, where then I think we, even though they say standalone adventure for Starfighter, get some variation of a spin-off out of Starfighter and the world it creates post Rise of Skywalker. Now we also have the Simon Kinberg trilogy that's supposedly being worked on as well. That's a possibility for 2030. But I think ideally they want 2028 to be, or 2029 to be a Mandalorian and Grogu movie. And I think the only way we get a movie in 2028 is if, one, they already have the Mandalorian and Grogu season or movie 2 script written and they're like ready to go. They're just pulling a Superman and like waiting to see if it makes money. And if it does, they're going to start immediately. We could get the Mandalorian and Grogu movie in 28. If Simon Kinberg's actually pretty far along, and they're waiting for like Celebration 27 with the 50th anniversary, and it being in LA for celebration in the United States since 2022. Maybe they're looking to drop some big bombs in regards to what that is and how that relates to the Ray movie. I just don't see the one movie I don't see it being at all in the next 5 years is Dave Filoni's movie. I think that has now been basically scrapped and turned into whatever this Mandalorian and Grogu trilogy is, and then maybe Dave will direct the final movie in that trilogy. But I don't think his movie is particularly happening anytime soon because I personally think that the Mandalorian and Grogu is going to be kind of a soft reboot of this whole Thrawn Imperial Remnant storyline. And I think they are going to try to get as much out of that as possible. Probably planning on getting minimum a trilogy, but hope they probably would hope even more. So I think Filoni's movie, at least the way it was pitched, is scrapped. I think the Ray movie is completely on the shelf too right now until they figure out what Starfighter is and what they want to do with post Rise of Skywalker timeline. I don't think we see Ray movie before we see Simon Kinberg or Starfighter 2 if we get a Starfighter 2. And then Dawn of the Jedi is is I think another one that would be really easy for them to scrap, but I have a little more faith in it just purely because of the people involved. If James Mangold keeps kind of trending towards like we don't have too many directors who have exclusivity deals. There really are only two that I'm in my head aware of, and that's Denis Villeneuve with Warner Brothers and Christopher Nolan, who used to be with Warner Brothers and is now with Universal after the Tenet debacle and the 2021 day and date Max release debacle. So uh, Mangold puts himself in a pretty prestigious group of company there, and if he continues to elevate, let's say his heist movie with Chalamet is like an Oscar nominee and then he does another film and he wins best director or something and continues to have that prestige. I would imagine Lucasfilm don't let him go easily. Like they would actively try to fast track that film. I think right now they're not sure where they want to go with their universe. He has a lot of other work going on. I think it's one of those things that's just like call me when you need me type of thing, and I'm going to work on other things in the meantime. So I think that's the biggest wild card. Like I think it could be pretty much any year after 2028 we see Dawn of the Jedi, but I don't think it's one that they're actively intending on getting going until Star Wars movies are kind of back where they should be in terms of box office, in terms of consistency and all of that. So those would be my predictions through 2030. What about you, Sonic?
Well, we're kinda on this, like, 2 timeline sort of thing, right? It's not just that the fact that we have Mandalorian Grogu coming out and Starfighter the year after, but the type of films that are gonna be made in this new era for Star Wars. I think that's the biggest thing. It's not like Mandalorian Grogu was conceived as, like, a huge, big film, and we never knew these characters, right? It's not like
Right.
they were, just, like, ideas thrown around in the sequel trilogy or, like, some other TV show, and then they're like, "Wait, this is our chance to, like, finally introduce these guys because it makes sense for the story." No, Filoni and Favreau especially have had a lot of time with these characters, and, it tapered off with season 3 without a doubt, but a lot of that, again, comes down to the mishandling of separating Favreau and Filoni and kinda jam-packing everything in together, both of them kinda insisting that this all happens sometimes within 6 months, sometimes within 3 years, like, they don't have any sense of the timeline, all that, and it's because they had all these shows happening at the same time, they're like, "Yeah, just it's all around this time, right?" Now it's like, "Okay, here's their chance to finally streamline and make all this work out," you know, play to the strengths of Favreau, who first originally pitched the idea before Filoni had ever come on. Obviously, Filoni has a lot of background in Mandalorian culture and everything with his work on the Clone Wars, on Rebels, with obviously none other than George Lucas, especially on Clone Wars. Kathleen Kennedy brought them together, and that's why they worked really well in the first 2 seasons. There was a lot of lore and weight that was hidden, kind of peeking out a lot of times, but there was still, like, the episodic, adventure of the week sort of feel it could balance quite well while it's still stringing you along for a bigger plot line that'll, play out in the last few episodes of the season. Once you separate them, both of their strengths went to their shows, and then their weaknesses showed up in both of their shows. So I think right now, the timeline that they're in for figuring out just the Mandoverse is like, hey, we created something that wasn't supposed to be big, right? It wasn't ever supposed to be the flagship, right? I mean, Ewan McGregor was talking about it recently. He's like, we all thought that it would be the Obi-Wan Kenobi show, right? And if it maybe been filmed a year or two earlier, if it had like less code restrictions and all that and more time from converting it from a planned trilogy down into this TV show, maybe that comes out way better and it looks way more like Mandalorian season 1 does. And, people are a lot more kind to its flaws, right? And I still like the show quite a bit, but there are definite flaws for sure. But yeah, I think the fact that it blew up and then they couldn't handle that, like, "Oh, man, we wanna pack out everything on streaming," and then that streaming bubble exploded, now they're like, "Well, we can't just abandon it," right? So that's why Mandalorian Grogu exists. It's a condensed version of season 4. It is really taking what season 3 ended with, the promise of Din and Grogu now fully together, hunting down Imperials while continuing their training together, right? Obviously, how much we're gonna see of that happen in a film versus, 30 to 40-minute episodes of 8, right, for a season, we're gonna have stuff cut out. That's without a doubt, but I think this will play to Favreau's strengths. I think that'll be good for him. Now the question is, okay, well, if this is a soft reboot, how does Ahsoka play into this, right? You can ignore Skeleton Crew almost entirely. Boba should not be ignored, but, they seemingly are doing that. I think they're still gonna draw with the twin huts that we saw in the poster, which is, intriguing. It wasn't really something we had known about before this trailer came out, right? So excited to see what they're trying to do to, like, actually put these elements into this sort of movie trilogy here, and I think they're just trying to finish off the story, right? They're gonna give us enough of what you need to know between episode 6 and the start of this old movie series here, and be like, "Hey, like, there were these shows, you coulda watched them, you might remember some of it vaguely enough. 1, 2, 3. These are your 3 movies." It leads us into the conclusion. I think it is just all about streamlining, streamlining, streamlining when it comes to this avenue of the filmmaking side right now. Because yeah, I think the Disney Plus live action show bubble, while you might never necessarily get the money and the prestige of an Andor again, you still wanted to feel more like it's show run shows again. You wanted to feel like you're dealing with TV shows and not these like stretched out movies that sometimes work, sometimes don't work. So trying to keep things simple, trying to streamline stuff. Ahsoka is the complication though, because there's a lot of lore and a lot of fun that's being had there. And if it was just season 2 dealing with everything on Peridia, you probably make this a lot easier for yourself and get to do whatever you want in Mandalorian Grogu. But we know for a fact that Ezra is going to be a big character in season 2. He's obviously in the main galaxy. We've seen and heard about like full sets instead of the volume being used for like the home one and everything, the defense fleet. It's like we're gonna see way more scale to what the New Republic Defense Fleet's gonna do. We're gonna see more scale, and inherently to the point that hey, Thrawn is now on Dathomir and he's amassing his forces. Probably some of that stuff is gonna be built out. Now the question is, does a Mandalorian Grogu, whether it be 2028 or 2029, is that gonna then incorporate stuff into from Ahsoka season 2? Is that where we end that show and then bring in that stuff for the viewer, right? Where it's like, hey, if you're watching the TV show Pathline, you'll have every detail. If you're starting with like 2 seasons of Mandalorian and Grogu, of the Mandalorian, and then you're getting into the Mandalorian Grogu, it's like, okay, cool. But I want you to also understand the galaxy at large and the stakes that are being built up here. Like, what is it? How does it do that? Is it through Mando's eyes and his little apprentice? Or do we have Ahsoka kind of come out with her own film and have like a New Republic film of sorts that's dealing with stuff with them presumably return to the main galaxy and getting themselves ready for the first kind of threats of Thrawn? Like, will it play out more like the novel itself, Heir to the Empire, where he is taking these first kind of advances and kind of pushing all these heroes and kind of putting them against each other, trying to stretch them against each other, pit them against each other without necessarily having full scale battles and conflicts quite yet, right? So all that is the real question for me. Obviously, we won't know until Ahsoka season 2, but in the case that Ahsoka season 2 is trying to be like, hey, this is the end of its story, and then we're gonna streamline it into a movie again, then maybe they try to balance between Ahsoka slash New Republic film, and then Mando and Grogu 2, and then Ahsoka and New Republic 2, and then maybe that trilogy ender for Mando and Grogu is actually like the 5th film in the series, 4th film in the series, whatever it is, and that's the one that condenses all the ideas that were originally there for the Filoni, like, New Republic conclusion film, right? I think 4 films is more than enough. 3, I think you start, cutting off a lot of stuff that would be fun to explore, but I think 4 might be enough to, like, really still do what you would have done in the TV shows and all that. And there's again, it all really depends on Mando and Grogu being a success. In the case that it's just very, like, modest of a success, they might just be like, "Oh, we're gonna bring it back for season 4," right? And just be like, "Oh, this was just like an in-between movie to get everybody refreshed again with the characters, get back to the original vibe, bring it back to Disney Plus," right? So, they are trying to streamline that. I think that is their ideal goal. 2023 trying to connect the New Republic finale film, Dawn of the Jedi, Ahsoka all together, Reyes was in there too. It's like it was way too ambitious, probably for not having very clear direction on any of the eras per se. Now they're like, let's just finish up the first 10 years, hopefully just through films, if not at least some extra stories can be done in like a TV show, like a Boba might take over, like maybe Book of Boba Fett comes out in season 2, and that's what takes over more of the adventure stuff, and then Mandalorian, Grogu, and Ahsoka stuff converted into film starts taking over the heavier plot elements of this era. Not quite sure, but I think they're just trying to like they're trying to shrink the scope, and that's what these mid-budget films offer. You don't have to do crazy levels of like pre-production work outside of the VFX, right? Now you can just be like, hey, well, we've already had all these sets. We just have to expand a couple certain things, get a couple new costumes, and you can kind of build it out all the way through, stack it on top of each other, as opposed to like a Starfighter, where it's like this is a whole new world that you're opening up and cracking open. So that's the one that I think will be the priority moving forward. I think Starfighter will be the second pathway. That'll be like the let's open the post episode 9 world, right? Will we get a Starfighter 2 per se? I'm not sure. I think these are big names that are being attached to this film. Not all of them have necessarily had huge careers quite like an Aaron Pierre, right? Like, let's say Lanterns is huge, right? He might start having to appear in a lot of these DC films and TV shows. He'll have a packed couple of years here as John Stewart, who's presumably going to be the lead Green Lantern, right? So does he have an opportunity to return? Is he just a one movie character? We don't know. The rumors around Amy Adams, you bring a redhead into Star Wars, right? And the rumors of her possibly being a Jedi and her son being force sensitive, Gosling's character not quite necessarily. Everybody thinks Mara Jade, right? And then that brings up questions. Are we actually trying to expand stuff out about bringing Luke's Jedi survivors into this era to lay a foundation? Are we trying to build out all the world building that the sequels just kind of failed to do with the New Republic, with what happened in the 30 years in between? So I think that pathway, taking these bigger swings and all that, I don't know if we necessarily want to just jump into a Starfighter 2 yet. I think it's more like let's plant these things that like this film addresses, like Stormtrooper Rebellion and the awakening of the Force Stormtroopers. We're getting the Last Order novel with Finn and Janna. Perhaps we kind of get like a semi-sequel expansion where now it's like we're getting a Finn movie where we see like what more of like a militant Jedi and someone is trying to like undo the damage of the First Order and everything that's happening in the Unknown regions and everything that happened in the Outer Rim, right? And we can see a little bit more of the world that's changed between the three trilogies while still doing more about the Stormtrooper rebellions and like the campaigns there. You don't necessarily have to be like, okay, now we know everything that's happening with Rey's new Jedi Order yet. We don't necessarily have to know anything about like all the governments in place. Now we're just keeping a little bit more focused on like what would someone who's a reformed military individual do when given the opportunity to not only show off their training and show off their Jedi prowess that Episode 9 really cut back on, but now you get to fill out this world. So I'm expecting more of these kind of movies to populate, right? And I don't think that because of that, they'll all kind of feel like sort of spin-offy. They'll all kind of feel like, hey, there's a cool new Star Wars film that I want to check out. There's maybe like a character or two from sequels or somebody from one of the TV shows showed up as like a supporting character. But I think these will be completely fresh. Will be led to just be like, hey, these are just fun, a Star Wars story as stories being told here, or setting the stage for then what will happen 10 years later down with the eventual Rey's New Jedi Order, the eventual Kinberg trilogy and all that. So I expect it to be more of spin-offs like this. I'm not really betting on a Starfighter 2. Even if it is great, I think whatever elements of that plot line will probably become like a secondary plot line or like referenced in another film without necessarily being like, whoa, these are all like streaming shows set at the exact same time. I expect them to be a couple years apart and all this and that. Like this, it's a big galaxy. Try to make the post sequel era feel big again instead of feeling like everything's shrunk down and narrowed in on Palpatine versus Skywalker lineages, right? That's what the sequels ended up as. This is your opportunity to be like, well, how did the rest of the galaxy deal with this? And how are they continuously dealing with this after three trilogies of this madness of the Skywalkers, right? So that's kind of how I see it. Take the bigger risks to just set the stage for stuff that will be even bigger. That's what your Starfighter promises, right? In a post episode 9 world. Streamline everything between maybe one TV show, but mostly mid-budget films like Mandalorian, Grogu, and you finish the first 10 years, and then now you can kind of focus on animation and do everything else if you want to do for those 20 years, take bigger risks with books and all that. But until you finish off that Mandalorian timeline of sorts for that's dominating the first 10 years in New Republic, feels like all the doors are closed on stuff like that we also want to see in those 30 years, like Luke's Jedi Order, like what happened with the Centrists, like how once the First Order first appeared in the galaxy, there's a whole plot point of them, like a bunch of these centrist senators and their solar systems literally just being like, yep, I'm joining the First Order immediately. We know that factoid, but we never saw stuff like that happen. This is a first real chance to see all that stuff happen, what actually survived leading to sequels, all that. But you have to finish the streamlining of the Mandoverse and make it very clear, set up chronologically, makes sense. And I think that'll be the ways to do it. 20 to 30. I think by that point we'll probably have like three, maybe four Star Wars films. I'm not really expecting much more because you're dealing with these two timelines that, yes, if you do it right, everything will work out great. But if you don't do it right, then you kind of have to go back to the drawing board for both of them.
I think we will get Starfighter 2 as long as it makes money. I don't think I don't really think that them saying that it's a one-off movie will have anything to do with its ultimate success because yes, you have multiple timelines to flesh out, but I think the sequels in general is just that's the sketchiest timeline to them right now because The Mandalorian, they know it has a built-in audience that's currently a little divided, but the majority of your average Joes right out there, maybe not the vocal Star Wars fans on the internet, but the average Joes who really make a movie profitable. We're us seeing it two, three, four times helps, but the opening weekend drive of just the average person going is the reason they're banking on The Mandalorian and Grogu, and if they can make it for cheap or cheaper and also make enough money, they feel like they have their kind of bankable franchise there. I don't think it's a guarantee, but I feel like that's their thought internally over at Lucasfilm right now. The sequel timeline is sketchy. It's just because you can go anywhere with it, but you have no direct link to the main Star Wars lineage, right? You don't have Luke, Leia, Han, Anakin, Obi-Wan. You don't have that this time around. The sequels had that. And so you have that just kind of broken, fractured divide around do these three characters sell? And I think right now what they're trying to do is say, in case they don't, we need other players in this time period. And I think Ryan Gosling is one of those characters they're hoping can be a cornerstone piece of this whole thing. So maybe I buy that Starfighter itself is a story that's crafted for one movie, but I don't buy whatsoever that if Starfighter is successful, we don't get a second movie with those same characters and with the same talent because it's going to be they need something they know they can bank on in that post sequel timeline to revitalize all of the other stuff. And so I think that Starfighter is a staging ground. That's why I really don't see the Ray movie coming out anytime soon after that. I think they're still going to find their footing with Starfighter and see how they can build up the rest of it. And if Kinberg's trilogy takes place before Ray's movies, because Ray's movie, we a lot of times we forget that Ray's movie was supposed to take place 15 years after the sequels, and now Ryan Gosling's Starfighter movie was 1 year after the sequels. So they're now playing with a lot closer to the sequel timeline than they originally were going to. And so depending on what Kinberg is doing, if Kinberg is say making a story about a younger next generation that's surrounded by the Finn, Rey, and Poes, but not necessarily starring the Finn, Rey, and Poes, then you now have a basis for trying to build up the post sequel timeline around other characters and then revitalizing those big characters that we already know through the other characters and trying to flesh out and enhance the story. And in doing so, you end up with something a little bit more akin if you're trying to build a cinematic universe or a big time period around the post sequels. You end up with something more akin to Marvel or DC that has the luxury of having a bunch of different superheroes with iconic titles and names, and you could throw them all out there in one big movie, right? Star Wars doesn't necessarily have that. Most of its iconic characters are all in the main saga, and there aren't that many other characters who you're going to just throw in that will like make for an Avengers style film. So I think right now what they're trying to do is kind of craft that Avengers basically for the post sequels by trying a bunch of new IP and saying, okay, when we throw Ray and Finn and Poe back in there, when we maybe throw some other twists and turns about people who survived Luke's Jedi Academy or maybe pull a name from Legends, do we hype the crowd up by doing that because they already love the core group that's going to be leading that, or does it bring that kind of down, right? So they're revitalizing in a lot of different ways. I think if you just go straight in with Ray, you run the risk of it being mediocre, and even if it's just mediocre, the Ray haters are going to go crazy and it's going to bomb. And so you have to either hit a guaranteed home run or you do it this way. And I think this way is a little safer, a little smarter. And it also gives us a chance to explore more people and more stories, just to flesh out everything, add new layers, explore the underworld, which we don't really do at all in the sequels, explore different facets of the military, which we don't really do at all in the sequels. Do all of that type of stuff, and then you can maybe come back and add the Jedi element, add the legacy element a little bit later, and that will enhance what you're building here. I think that might be what they're going for that side of Star Wars for the post sequels, and I think that might be a better way to do it. As for Mandalorian, I mean, I think we have a good chance at getting those every 2 years just because of shooting on the volume, because of it being low budget, because the main character doesn't need to be an A-list actor. They have stunt doubles for pretty much all of it. They only need Pedro Pascal for a few weeks, so you run the risk of not maybe having a franchise that's a little less exciting for Star Wars fans, but you have something that might be a little bit more bankable if you're constantly delivering good product. And again, good product is the name of the game. So yeah, I think we see two Mandalorian movies by 2030 if the first one is successful. Again, with that's the caveat of everything. I think the most interesting wild card for me right now is Dawn of the Jedi, because I think depending on James Mangold's continued rise, and he's always been fairly prolific. He's made a lot of great movies, had some Oscar nominations, had a lot of great genre films. I admire somebody like Mangold because he, like Nolan, like Villeneuve, and to me, Mangold doesn't quite reach their level. He hasn't had quite a masterpiece like the other two have, but like those two directors, he likes to play in genre, and he doesn't really seem to care or have this kind of, you know, this arrogance about like what's true cinema and what's not. He's got a pure embrace for all facets and all genre, and I really appreciate that about those three in terms of like our modern Spielbergs and people like that who can make fun family movies, make hard-hitting dramas, make gripping war movies, make sci-fi fantasy films. He's kind of entered in that conversation of people who can do it all, and so I appreciate that about Mangold. And if his star continues to rise, I think that would be a person, especially with Star Wars trying to find its footing in theaters again, that like, how could you let him go and let that project disappear once he's done with his movie with Chalamet? Because I mean, that's he'll if he can get to that level of acclaim where his name sells films like Nolan and like Villeneuve, I mean, he can sell your movie without you having any iconic characters. And I feel like the characters and like the blank slate of Dawn of Jedi is this the main thing they've been worried about in terms of getting it off the ground. Just how do we sell this movie? And I think that's more like Rogue One being a little safer after The Force Awakens. It's a little safer bet because it's Star Wars. Star Wars, if Star Wars is healthy, Star Wars sells itself. If Star Wars isn't healthy, then you kind of rely on nostalgia and other gimmicks to sell Star Wars. So hopefully by the time Dawn of the Jedi comes out, it's got the filmmaking side going for it, and it's also got the revitalized Star Wars franchise going for it to help sell it. So I think that's the biggest wild card, and I think the other wild card out there is Rogue Squadron because that's one that just keeps randomly popping up, like that they're still working on it, and then you hear they're not, and then you hear they are, and that was supposed to be a
Yeah.
post Rise of Skywalker movie as well. And now you have Starfighter. If that's maybe tied into the military in some ways, do you have Rogue Squadron and you kind of go there as like a kind of the same way Rogue Squadron revitalized the post original trilogy timeline originally? It was our main bridge between New Republic and an original trilogy. Can they kind of do something that builds and bridges through the military, the post sequels to whatever eventually happens with the Jedi? I think there's a lot of room there for possible stories in the future. But what do you guys think? Let us know in the chat. Thanks for that question, Ryan. We went on for a long time talking about it, but it's a good one, and it's something to definitely think about as Star Wars begins revitalizing its film slate. Let's get to the next question. We have Diet Pro Farah, who says, "Why is it so hard to implement cool things in I've been a Star Wars fan, or in being, I can't quite understand what you're saying, Diet," and says, "I played Star Wars: The Old Republic, and those cinematic trailers are amazing. So why can't Disney translate that into live action?" Well, for the first part, in terms of translating the trailers, right? I mean, it's easier to do in animation than it is in live action. There are just things you can conceptually do a lot easier with less money and less specific need to make your money back. So there's a lot of financial logistics around that, not to mention the fact that those cinematics are all 5 to 10 minute trailers versus hour and a half to 2 hour movies, or 4 or 5 hour TV shows. So you have a lot less logistics behind that. As for Star Wars: The Old Republic, it's a series that's really, the cinematics are incredible, and I watch them 2 3 times a year because I do love them so much. And the game itself has a lot of rich storytelling. The Old Republic era in general has rich storytelling, whether you're talking about Tales of the Jedi, KOTOR, or the Old Republic, or the end of it with Darth Bane. There's a lot of great storytelling around there. We've talked a lot about how you can simplify that and bridge all those things together in a little bit more neat package to create something really interesting. And then personally, I would do that via a TV show with maybe some other tie-in material if the TV show got popular, but with the passion, love, care, and budget of something like Andor, rather than trying to do it in a more restricted way like a Mandalorian and Grogu. Not quite sure if Disney Plus is willing to do that currently in their current state, but if Star Wars explodes again on the big screen, I think they'd be more willing to take risks on Star Wars Prestige TV, because the hopes would be that they would all kind of tie together in an ecosystem of like, people have to see the new show on TV because the films are so great and they just can't get enough Star Wars, right? That would be the hope. But I think they're taking a break on that right now until they figure it out. But as for why they can't translate it, I mean, one of the things with the Old Republic, right, was the fact that it was a time period that was so open, had so many years. You can kind of just do whatever you want. You don't have to necessarily worry about other lore or other canon. I think for them right now, in terms of Old Republic, they know they have to get it right, the way they've set up their movie and TV universes, and I think that they consider that one of their most rich, well-known, and exciting properties, part of Star Wars. And I think they want to make sure they do it right. And I'm glad they haven't just thrown a random Old Republic movie out there just for us to see if it sticks, because really, if they're not ready to do it, they're not ready to do it. So I think that's the main reason. But I think you're asking a little bit broader question as well about, like, why does it seem like there are a lot of good ideas sometimes with these shows and they're just not able to capture the magic that seems like there on paper? And I think that speaks to a larger question, just in general, right? Like with something like Obi-Wan Kenobi, should have been a huge slam dunk, but why wasn't it? There are obviously the real life reasons of COVID and some of the restrictions around that, and shooting during COVID and all that type of stuff. But but in general, I'm kind of with you. It is a little baffling that it's not just one show that's COVID, ridden. It just seems like almost every show outside of Andor has concepts or ideas or is building towards something and just kind of falls off. And it is an issue they need to kind of get back to, and some of it goes back to the other real life issue of when their previous CEO was in charge and they were just trying to make as much stuff as possible, not caring about the quality for streaming. The scripts definitely went by the wayside. They didn't polish them quite as much as something that was a little more creator driven like Andor. So there are a lot of factors for sure, but I think with something like Star Wars, I think there is still this kind of absent identity around what is Star Wars and what is Star Wars post George Lucas Star Wars. What is and meaning his six movies, his characters from his six movies, they've been the core of Star Wars film and TV forever. We've had other great characters in books, and they feel like Star Wars, or video games, and they feel like Star Wars. But it's been hard to capture the Star Wars feel and spirit and vibe outside of George Lucas's content. And that we've done great things like Andor and Rogue One. We've done some mediocre things. We've done some really bad things with Star Wars. But in general, I think it kind of just comes down to back when George Lucas was running it. I mean, it's a single person with a single creative vision versus now you have hundreds and dozens of creators working in different facets on what they view Star Wars as and what they want, where they want to go with Star Wars. So I think in some ways it requires, somebody like Dave Filoni at the CCO position, kind of almost in some ways guiding and convincing people to go in certain directions that feel a little bit more classically attuned to Star Wars. But it also just kind of depends on the stories they're picking, and some of the stories they've picked haven't quite been at the standard that you would expect from that franchise. Whereas, something with a little bit more imagination and creativity, which I think is also something that's been maybe lacking a little bit from Star Wars, is imagination. We seem to kind of go back to the same wells over and over and over again, similar styles, storytelling, similar characters we've seen before, stuff like that. So I think it speaks to all of that. But yeah, I think I understand what you're saying, and I do think it's a problem that hopefully they are going to continue to try to work towards correcting, bringing back that spirit and that imagination that you see in some types of unchained mediums like video games or books or comics. But it is in some ways kind of the nature of film and TV that it is such an expensive medium that you have a little bit with a lot more practicality to it, that you have a little bit less room for going bonkers with your kind of imagination and the amount of things you can bring to the screen.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all those points. When you're saying why, like, we're not getting that cinematic look, like, Liam's right. We don't have a defined look for Star Wars for all of its eras, right? I mean, so much of episode 7 through 9 now can be retroactively turned into, like, how does legacies endure? How do they come back up again? How do, like, rise of fascism show up again and all that? Like, you can play off of that, but that was not the necessarily the original intention of that trilogy. That was, you could say, as much as people, want to discredit Last Jedi, it was still the most visually unique film of that whole trilogy. It's had the most unique designs and all that. It really was, frankly, JJ. Like, you see something like a TIE silencer, right? Has probably one of the most iconic sequences in The Last Jedi, of, like, hunting down, ready to shoot down, and, like, just the way that the editing was done there, the filmography, the acting alone between Carrie and everything that was going on with Adam Driver, right? And it just looked like, yeah, you're taking a step forward. This is still truly an Empire adjacent force, but you see what's different and changed about them. And then the next movie opens up with him basically just having, like, a souped up TIE interceptor, right? It's like, okay, like, how does that look and feel different, right? And that's the thing about JJ. He didn't necessarily want to take as big risks visually. He wanted to remind everybody, this is the Star Wars we all loved. We hated the prequels, right? Like, that was, there's so much of that, like, original identity in the first, like, 5, 6 years of Star Wars under Disney that was defined by this guy who very publicly was like, "I'm not the biggest fan of the prequels," right? Like, "Haha, here Jar Jar skeletons on Jakku," right? Like, we didn't have the prequel memes rise, or and subsequent fall to some degree, but we didn't have this, like, prequel love from our generation fully kick in quite yet. It was just still a couple years to go. It was, like, 2017, 2018, right? The film started for The Force Awakens, like, 2013, 2014. They weren't thinking about that, right? The nicest thing post prequels was the Clone Wars, but that still hadn't reached critical mass yet. Most people like, probably, Hayden Christensen's not like, "Hey, like, I'm ready to watch the Clone Wars to do it that 2009." He's probably like, "I'm just trying to move on from Anakin right now and just that period of my life and see what acting means like to me, what my family is like, and all that." Now we live in a world where he's like, "Yeah, I looked up everything what Matt Lanter did for that character and all this and that." Like, people are like, "Wow, the Grievous update and the whole Battle Geonosis and Battlefront 2 changed the game for how visually stunning the prequels looked, especially since we can blend it with a little bit more of an even ground with the original trilogy in those games." Like, all that stuff kinda came up, and that sort of cinematic stuff actually revitalized a lot of what people kinda downplayed about the prequels. They were like, "Oh, the prequels aren't super cinematic, all this and that." They had a great visual flair, but they weren't necessarily, like, dynamic and expansive in a way with filmmaking that was provided by the original trilogy. Once that all kinda came to fruition, then you start looking into the sequels and you're like, "Yeah, well, what's happening there, right? Why does it look so samey? Why does it just look like a half update?" Right? And that comes down to JJ not being the visionary that we got out of George Lucas. George Lucas was like, "My 7 through 9 would never look like this," right? He wanted he might have had the same plot generally for Luke, but he we probably see way crazier things happen, just way crazier visuals, right? So, all that put together, you're like, "Yeah, we're not really sure the central piece of Star Wars under Disney, what it's trying to say and show for the next generation and onward of Star Wars," right? And that's gonna be the biggest holdup. It's gonna be hard to move past that. That's why we're getting stuff like Starfighter, why we're still contending with stuff like the Mandoverse, where it's like, are we still ready to let that go when that still sells so well and that's still what a huge portion of fans want? But yeah, now we're getting later and later past even the prequels and their heyday. Now we're getting stuff like the Old Republic with KOTOR games and Star Wars: The Old Republic, which, yes, we loved all those cinematic trailers when they're coming out, but I remember being around there in 2011, 2012. People are like, "This game does not live up to that at all," right? It's an MMO, it was never going to, but people are like, "Well, this doesn't really feel like a KOTOR to me." Like, people forget at one point after, like, 8 months of it being released, it had fallen so low in subscription rates. Like, its F2P model had to come out quite quickly, and it stabilized, became like a top 3, top 4 MMO for like 6, 7 years straight. But it was a game that, like, people who loved the original KOTOR were like, "Yeah, sure, I love the cinematics, but it doesn't even fit with that vision of that world. Okay, 300 years later, why does it feel like the prequels and everything has greebles on top of it? Why does it look like everything's so advanced even compared to KOTOR?" Right? We've always had this friction between everything, and, I argue a KOTOR fan probably doesn't listen to a Tales of the Jedi fan who's like, "How does this take place 20, 30 years before?" And when one feels archaic, almost Egyptian inspired in a lot of ways, and then this feels like, "Hey, we're wearing prequel robes 4,000 years before." Star Wars has always had this issue, right? Some eras have just happened to be a lot more concrete and defined and usually been held up by, like, full out movies. But the Old Republic is it's just been an even more confusing ground in a lot of ways because it's never been consistent. I wanna get to that level where we have Knights of the Eternal Empire and stuff like that, just be like free willy, fun stuff and all, but it's hard, right? The Old Republic has never been consistent about what it's trying to say and show. It has so much time and space that it can be like anything can happen here, but to do that on a TV show budget with everything being based on the volume, like that it wasn't gonna happen. The volume takes so much time to just do VFX in front, which is usually the last part of filmmaking and TV show making. Now you're suddenly saying, "Hey, I need to have on set like 100 extras with a lightsaber, and they all have to have extremely great choreography and jumping around." Like, that's only something you can get out of, like, a video game. And if you're saying cinematic trailers are amazing there for The Old Republic, I think the closest thing that canon has gone to is, like, probably, like, Fallen Order and Survivor. Yes, it's one central character, but you can't tell me you're not hyped seeing, in Survivor's trailer, Cal, like, fighting off, like, a stormtrooper on a speeder bike, ripping him up off the bike with, with the Force and launching him into a TIE fighter that's flying right over straight into the cockpit exploding. There's some crazy cinematic stuff that you can do in the game, and that actually happens to be in the game as a cutscene, right? So it's not like they can't do it. It's just, can you do it as a TV show with the restrictions today? No. I mean, streaming was always gonna be undercut by the fact that it was never about making money. It was about getting as many subscribers as possible to our new platform, and it fell apart. Like, yeah, everybody's cutting back. The only person that really only studio that hasn't is Netflix. Netflix has been the one that's been able to find every couple years a new big show like a Squid Games or something, and they're able to, like, churn out stuff like this. Star Wars under Chapek, Marvel under Chapek, really ruined a lot of the visual fidelity of both franchises, and Star Wars was already in a much more confusing place. So, to get to the point of doing, like, an Old Republic show or a movie, no, it's gotta be planned out. It's gotta have the biggest budget. Like we talked about this, it's gotta have the biggest budget. It's gotta have like a 10-year timeline. Getting anything to that scale and level that truly respects something that a cinematic trailer can achieve, yeah, it's gonna be super hard. And frankly, I say if you're gonna one up it, which should always be your goal, right? You should always want to feel like the next Star Wars thing is taking a step further. It should also have its own truly unique flair. And that's one of my biggest criticisms about the Old Republic. It didn't truly have its own unique flair. It fell into a little bit more of that mess that KOTOR 2 really began with, everything being as prequel as possible, as close to modern Star Wars as possible, when it's the Old Republic. We don't necessarily have to change how the Force works, but we can be like, "Hey, maybe your lightsaber is not as effective. Maybe your blasters are a bit bulkier and all that." You could have played a lot more with it being a truly different era, and it really doesn't come off that way. It feels entirely too modern compared to KOTOR, so that's my personal issue with it, but I get what you're saying about cinematic, about the scale, about the fluidity and all that, and you just can't do that with the current streaming business model falling apart. If you're gonna do it on TV shows, it's gotta be 10 years, most money ever pumped, more than Rings of Power is getting, for sure, like, maybe double that budget, honestly, and if you're gonna do it in the movies, you probably get, like, a sequence like that for, like, 5, 10 minutes, but maybe nothing longer than that. Like, it'll probably be the same length, frankly, because that's a lot of money. But if you make it like a 3D animated show, yeah, you could probably get that. If the Star Wars is willing to really take animation to another level, just pour money out of their pockets like George Lucas did for the Clone Wars, that's the closest you'll get to it, but expecting, like, 200, 300 people on set, being able to do insane choreography, jumping, flying around, a ship crashing through the Jedi Temple and all that. At least for where we are in filmmaking and budget restrictions, I still think we're, even Disney is a ways away from having that truly just become, like, a standard.
AC Bagel says, "What do you think is going through Disney's minds when they decide to go for a Mandalorian and Grogu into a Rey connected starfighter, etc., rather than trying to adapt something like Ulick's story into a saga?" Well, I think it kind of goes back to the previous question we had just before the Old Republic, and a little bit with that Old Republic question we just answered as well. It's just familiarity, right? There, not that many people know the story of Ulick Qel-Droma. It could be great in film or TV, and it probably would be because it's a really, really good comic and it gets great at times. But people know Mandalorian and Grogu, people know Rey. Right now, when you have a business like Disney has, when you have the volatility of streaming, when you have the volatility of films in theaters, but also the smashing success of films in theaters that we've seen over the last few years. Right now, they're just playing it safe. I'm not saying that's the right or wrong way to do it, but they're playing it safe to try to get Star Wars back in theaters. I think they're concerned that people won't show up because it's been 7 years. And so they're going with movie stars. They're going with Star Wars franchise characters that people are more recently familiar with. Mandalorian and Grogu, like I said before, you can't discount how much the parks play into a lot of things because with Disney, they have a captive audience of millions of people every year who are on varying levels of fandoms towards their different IPs, Star Wars, animation, Pixar, Marvel. and you have a way to show those people different things that can be tied to your IP. And one of the things that's been big in the parks in the last 5 years has been the Mandalorian, has been Grogu. When Din Djarin's walking around Star Wars land and has Grogu, people line up, people follow him, people want to take pictures. That type of thing, you can't underestimate just the visual iconography of things that people are consistently seeing, consumers, Disney fans, even, and there's a lot of people that go to Disneyland every year that aren't Disney fans, that people just see that and they're like, I know that's Star Wars. I saw that in Star Wars land. So they're going with the safe bet. Hopefully that the safe bets move into eventually a little bit more risky bets. Like Dawn of the Jedi is a risk. It would be something that would technically be a pretty big risk, even if you had a major filmmaker behind it. And to me, that's the reason they haven't made it yet. I think it's a big risk. Not only the story itself, because you can make a lot of people upset by telling the origin story of the Jedi, but on top of that, how do you connect it to the previous Legends material, which is a bridge they've tried to cross already, and they've kind of done varying ways, different levels of success. Also, you have the idea that there are no characters in this that people are familiar with, so there are a lot of different reasons, but I do think familiarity and playing it safe is the main reason they are doing Starfighter, Ray movie, Mandalorian, Grogu, etc., because they know that those have been profitable in the past. So hopefully they get back to doing some more original stuff. And then I kind of also want to just specifically talk about Ulick and like that type of thing, Tales of the Jedi, Legends in general. And I talk about this a lot on the stream, but I did make a video a while back talking about like, if we're going to adapt Legends anymore, why don't we just do our own Legends universe? Because then you don't have one-to-one comparisons with canon lore versus Legends lore. You can actually do a book adaptation universe, like, Lord of the Rings is an adaptation of those books, or Harry Potter, right? They're not one-to-one with the books, but they're movie versions. If you do it in the Star Wars universe we have now, you're going to have a tough time with like pulling stuff from Legends. And this doesn't necessarily apply to Old Republic and Dawn of the Jedi, but you have a tougher time pulling stuff from Legends and then condensing it in a way that also makes sense with the things they've come up with in their canon and still making people happy. So it's like not going to be an adaptation anymore. Now it's going to be a variation. And that's what we've seen a lot of stuff in Legends become in canon is it's not a one-to-one adaptation. It's not an attempt to bring the book as faithfully as possible to the big screen or to the small screen. It's been, how do we take this and translate it into the new lore we want to do? And that doesn't make many people happy because you have people who are reading it who are Legends fans going, well, this isn't as good as the old stuff. You also have people who are newer fans who want it to be a little bit more tied to the universe. You also sacrifice new characters who could serve that role in the newer universe. So personally, I've started to kind of just subscribe to the belief of like, if we're going to do Legends adaptations, let's either do them in their own animated world, their own live action world, their own specific world, so we can just actually adapt the source material and then let canon just do original stuff finally, because it's just canon's been so tied to the past, so tied to Legends, so tied to things that they've tried to cherry pick, but yet it's made canon not unique on its own. It's also made the adaptations of their versions from Legends not quite as good as the Legends versions because they can't go full Legends. So it's like it's just caught in this really this flux world of like not being able to find the happy medium. So for me, when it comes to like this body of source material, all these books that I've got behind me, New Jedi Order, Old Republic stuff, Clone Wars stories, all those types of things that they could be adapting. They made the decision in 2014, really in 2013, when they started working on Force Awakens, that they were not going to do that. And in doing so, now they've set a course for like we can't really go back to it otherwise. It's going to be something else entirely. So that's why I feel like they don't turn to the books they have. I think it's a mistake. I think that's something they could do and do it in another timeline, another universe. I'm not talking about like multiverse stuff. I'm just saying doing a separate like Infinity's version of Star Wars almost that's more tied to Star Wars Legends. Just call it Star Wars Legends. Star Wars Legends Tales of the Jedi. I think that something like that would work. And it would get people intrigued, and you can adapt it a little closer to what you want to do. But that's the main reason to me they haven't specifically gone to the well of books and comics and video games that they have from the pre Disney acquisition days, is because they are trying to incorporate as much as they can into their own canon. And in doing so, I think they've started to realize they're serving nobody really, because they were getting lesser versions of the legend stuff and also nothing new for canon.
I do appreciate another Ulick fan showing up on the channel. It's always nice to see the artwork that Liam's girlfriend did has me in the iconic cover of Ulick. So I'm always glad to hear that his name is not lost forever in the Star Wars EU, right? Like he is still a standout that people in canon, as we get further and further into it, they still do remember. Uh, why not try to adapt that into its own story and saga? I mean, I think there's a lot of cool things about it, right? Like, that's what I'm saying. Like, Tales of the Jedi, even though it was in the comics and that's even less of a budget than KOTOR and Star Wars: The Old Republic, it Veitch got to like have free reign. Like, most of his storytelling is directly connected into Jedi Academy. He obviously wanted to have Light Rider and have a little bit more with Dark Empire connections, right? Light Rider never came out. Oh, sorry, Lightsider never came out, but you know, at one point, he was defining the Old Republic. He was defining the stuff, but he was doing it in a time where Star Wars was like, "Yeah, you can do things, don't really care. It's really just Thrawn and the books that come out of that, the Bantam stuff that really matters," right? Comics hadn't really reached that point. Dark Empire was big, don't get me wrong, but Dark Empire and Thrawn trilogy really don't line up super well either, right? So it came out at a time where that stuff was more just like, "Hey, let's play around with it, have fun with it," right? And I love Ulick's story. It says a lot that it's pretty much a proto Anakin story that's frankly done better, right? The fact that his final arc actually deals with consequences with what he did throughout the galaxy, what he did during his fall, right? There's a lot of weight to his story in a way that Anakin has a lot, don't get me wrong, but it's a lot of it's dependent on Luke and to a degree Leia, right? What Ulick does as a character is almost entirely on him, on everything that's closed and rejected and cut off, right? His brother, Nomi, like it's a fantastic story. And then what he does with Vima at the very end there gives him like a proper conclusion. I've always loved and I've always admired that story. It's one of the more mature ways to handle redemption in Star Wars. I know there's been channels like Corey's Datapad and all that have been talking about this recently, but Star Wars is not necessarily the best franchise and like working through real heavy redemption for a lot of characters that have done like terrible things in the galaxy. And it's not just like, oh, like Exar Kun convinced Kip Duron and took over his body and mind. Like, well, Kip was a vessel, sure, but Corran Horn literally says in I Jedi to Luke, he's like, if you know, uh, Exar Kun really wanted to kill you, Master Skywalker, he would have just shot you into like Yavin on the Sun Crusher, and that'd be it, right? But he went and destroyed Caridia, and he destroyed that whole system, right? That's still Kip. That's still him, right? So seeing how they handle Ulick, fantastic story. I do also like the technology aspect of it a lot. There's sleeper ships. There's just the fact that there's more about the story taking place in the core worlds where there's systems in play, right? It's almost like feudalistic societies. Really cool ideas at play here, especially with like limitations of technology relative to what we had seen in Star Wars at that point. It made it feel very drastically different. Unfortunately, it's a story that's been swallowed up by KOTOR. KOTOR kind of brings everything to like almost a nearly level playing field as the prequels. It's really just aesthetics. And KOTOR 2 takes it to another level. And Star Wars The Old Republic almost feels like, wow, like we've reached more than prequel level technology at some points, right? And I think that's hard because it's such a small forgotten story from a period of Star Wars storytelling where you could do anything you wanted, but it was also very easy to be overwritten and ignored, right? And it just doesn't have that weight anymore. Something being written in 1994 versus a video game that came out at the turn of the century and had a sequel and then had a semi-sequel and an MMO that's still ongoing. yeah, I want something like Ulix to be adapted, but we also can't even do like a Tales of the Jedi per se anymore because Tales of the Jedi is now just its own little, one season. It's a Tales of, right? Like there's a Tales of the Empire, Tales of the Underworld. Maybe we'll get Tales of the Bounty Hunters next or something like that, right? It's almost like that title has also been stripped away from it. I'd love for them to do something like that because I think the tales from Legends, those are truly like you can play them off as just mythological fables, right? You don't necessarily have to give all the massive interconnected story about everything from when he was an apprentice all the way down to his fall and an eventual death, right? You could still just jump through different parts, condense parts of the story. You can also tell like almost contradictory story versions of him. Like you look the person who helped free the Empress Teta system. You look the one who fell to the dark side and was working with Exar Kun. You could defeat Mandalore. Is he a good guy or is he a bad guy at that point? You look what Vima, Sunrider, and Nomi. There's so many angles of that character that you could play as. Like, which one is a real myth? We aren't quite sure. And that's with how canon is structured right now. I think that allows you to be like, we don't really know exactly what the timeline is because the technology is so archaic, right? We don't know exactly who Ulick is as a character. We can just let him be a myth and a fable. And then you can tie it to characters like Anakin. You can tie it to characters where we're like, I can almost relate to what this guy was dealing with, but who was he really? Like, we don't have significant proof of like this all fitting together. There's a lot of contradictory elements about his character, right? I think if you play it off like that, you can still do like the money making angle of like, hey, how would like an Anakin react to this? Because for all intents and purposes, he has an Anakin storyline. You could make it be something that he's studying or something, right? Or like something that Obi-Wan's looking up because he's like, how do you handle people with extreme force power that like fundamentally change the Jedi Order? And this is a way to like touch on Revan and stuff like that. But it's hard. It's hard because that story, I don't think it's popular enough to get past animation per se. And if you start doing that in animation and you do it truly canonically, how are you setting up stuff for like a proper old republic that follows? And are you going to properly make a separation now? Right? Is it going to be more than the 20, 30 years that's there in Legends? It's a lot of confusing elements, right? But if you play them off as like a contradictory tale that you can't necessarily pinpoint, and you can almost like make him look a little bit modern in some stories, make him look like ancient, like great hyperspace war and all that era. Like we're not quite sure what era he truly lived in, but you have all these stories about him. I think you can make a pretty cool interpretation of what was there by Veitch in those comics, along with Kevin J. Anderson. But as far as like fully adapting him into a saga, it'd be hard, and I don't know how much you wanna do it now with how much of modern Legends and modern canon has really gone such redemptive versions of different characters and done it through books, done it through movies, done it through shows that Ulick's story, frankly, is much smaller in comparison.
Well, we have time for a few more questions, so keep firing them in. Next up is Star Wars Discussion, who says, I'm curious if you guys want to see season 2 of The Acolyte. I'll make my answer really quick. No, I don't. I didn't like The Acolyte. It's one of my least favorite Star Wars things ever, and I don't want to see any more of The Acolyte. I want to see Darth Plagueis at some point. I don't know whether that should be a film or a show. I think ideally a show with a high budget would work, but again, I don't know what Disney Plus Star Wars shows are going to look like post, Andor and Ahsoka, because we don't know any of them are coming out. We don't know a single Star Wars show after Ahsoka season 2. So we don't know where the budget will be. If the budget was high, I would love a 3-season Darth Plagueis show because the book is broken up into 3 parts, and I think it could work really well as a HBO level show, which everybody uses that as the comp for like prestige TV, but they've been the standard for 30 years. So HBO level Plagueis show, I'm down for. Acolyte season 2, not down for. I do need to know what happens to May and Osha and like their history and all that stuff just for my own head canon, but I don't need to know enough to have a second season. So I'm good with a book. I'm good with a source book, something explaining it away, comic, whatever. But they, to me, are a big new kind of hole in the Star Wars world. We need to know more about them and the answer, but I didn't find them or their characters interesting. I didn't find the writing behind either of them very good. And so yeah, I just really don't want to see anymore from like that specific creative team and that show and that storyline. But I do have interest purely because of my Star Wars lore brain and finding out what happens to them, where do they go, and what happens to Kamir. But I don't want it to be in a TV show.
I think if when the show was first released, they had already started working on a season 2 and they could have, like, angled it towards a conclusion and wrap up, that would have been more than fine, and it still lets you kinda do a soft reset, a soft reboot into going to Plagueis. It is just a lot of, like, now we're like, "What do we deal with that?" Right? Like, there's a whole thing with, like, um, not Mother Anastasia, but the other mother who was supposedly being set up to like have a role with like the Night Sisters of Dathomir and all that, but just disappears in the show. Right? There was a lot of like confusion, frankly, about why Vernestra is becoming like a middle management Jedi. Like, I don't really care about anything happening with like necessarily her and Kymer going wrong. I'm just like, well, if that happened, why is she like so adamantly hiding about it? This doesn't line up with like, and we're big High Republic fans. It just didn't line up with like the core principles of who she was. I think the final episode got much closer, but why was she not a way more prominent character to like actually deal with these discrepancies, deal with what she's dealing with? Like, if this whole conspiracy that was happening with Soul and everybody else on Brendok was actually possibly leading to like a bigger conspiracy that she's involved in, that she's trying to hide and cover up, why don't you like actually build that as like a brewing story from episode 2 onwards, right? And frankly, the way the show is structured, yeah, I know there's been reports that the budget wasn't like 300 million, it's more in the 200 millions, but Ahsoka for 90 million looks a lot better. It really does, right? And I know this is a show that didn't use a lot of the volume. I will give it heaps of praise for its lightsaber duels. Fantastic stuff. I don't necessarily love the thickness of the lightsabers, but I understand the evolving technology and make it a little bit more practical. That's totally fine for me. I honestly, it also kind of works in the High Republic era for me too, to some degree. But I just yeah, I just didn't like the structure of the show. I didn't love how, like, a couple of these episodes could have just been smushed into one episode. You probably get a better version of that. The Brendok flashbacks just really interrupted any flow and sequencing that was finally happening in the middle of the show. It was an ensemble show that killed off Chimere, not Chimere, it kills off 2 of the main characters, right, like, that are first introduced, and they just don't really get a lot of time to, like, really become fully fledged characters, and May and Osha, are they 2 halves of a soul, right? Is it more that as opposed to like, oh, the Virgins and the Force created 2 beings, right? Like Anakin, right? That's a big contradiction if it's true. I don't think it really is. I think the writing on the wall has been very clearly like there's been something that's very unnatural about them in a way that Anakin is a little bit more pure, right? Like the Force's reaction to him creating him was pure for what like was happening with Anase and what they're discussing with the other mother. She's like, what if the Jedi find out, right? Like, why would the Jedi be mad about like a human child being born of the Force, right? Like, it'd be insane for them. They'd be like, oh my god, like study, observe, check out the virgins, do all this and that, right? But it's because it's like, oh, there's something wrong about it, right? And I know people are like, oh, why are you trying to make these, especially like with real world implications of making like the POC actors like like villainous and dark from the start. I get that. I do, but you can still play off like a good side of the soul, a bad side of the soul, how it's almost yin and yang, how it's flipping between them. But they just didn't have any time for that in the show because they had like what 8 different characters they wanted to introduce, and then they were like, okay, well, actually, our twins are our focus. No, actually, these 2 other Jedi are the focus, the apprentices. Oh no, actually, it's a show that just didn't use its sequencing right, edited to the bone. Like, I as much grief as I give, what we see with Rodriguez and Book of Boba Fett, cutting a lot of his directed episodes down to the bone, that show still has a flow to it, right? It still bounces fairly well flashback to present, right? This is a show that, like, stretched out some episodes, condensed some episodes. It hurt May especially because their motivations are jumping all around, like, yeah, we can go on and on about it. I still think it's a decent-ish show, right? I think it would've been much better with a season 2, but whatever happens next, you still need to address the virgins, you still need to address everything about that, like, what really is special about May and Osha that makes them different than Anakin, that still doesn't, like, let people run with their whole clickbait of like, oh no, like Anakin's whole chosen one is destroyed. Like, no, I don't think that was the intention, but you have to now make it clear. Why didn't you do that in season one? We didn't see anything of the virgins. Whatever happens next with these characters, I think still needs to be shown visually. I think May Osha stuff still needs to be done visually. Do it as a TV special. You can get a lot of what's necessary for you know May and Osha done. Pretty much May being alive isn't necessary. You could have her killed off pretty quickly and tie in all the Vernestra stuff to her and wrap that up quickly. But the character that I think deserves to still stick around, especially with the implications of like he might have been the leader of the Knights of Ren or like the creator of the Knights of Ren with Chimera. Yeah, I want to see Chimera continue. If he's a breakaway Sith like the Plagueis novel kind of implies has been around and he's of the pure Bay Knight lineage versus him, cool. Actually play into that angle. But if you're not, then play into the Knights of Ren angle. Like you need to do these things. You need to establish where they're going in a special. And then after you finish and streamline and cut down and kill some characters, then you can get into your Plagueis trilogy. I think Plagueis still has to happen. I think it has to have a bigger scale and all that. You do need to finish what Acolyte hanging plot threads are, I think. And I think a TV special is the softest way of doing it, right? If you put another season's worth and you're like, oh, but it's actually a Plagueis show, people will be like, now you ruined Plagueis. But if you're just like, hey, we just want to wrap up May, Osha, the witches, and then set up Chimera to be like an interesting secondary protagonist or antagonist, or like an anti-hero of sorts in a Plagueis story or like the first movie of a Plagueis film. Yeah, I think that'd be good. That at least acknowledges the people who love the Acolyte. And, I'm a fan of Chimera too. I want to see Chimera be truly fleshed out, get to know his whole story. If you give us a chance to have Vernestra be properly told and actually have ties to what's going on here with Plagueis, especially now that we've read Trials of the Jedi and like the implications of that ending with a certain darkish Jedi turned Sith that happens there, right? You can really rework a lot of details, hopefully redeem Vernestra, but do it in a special into clean slate for Plagueis. That's how I look at it. Take just the characters that are important as Chimera, as maybe Vernestra, but the rest of it should be Plagueis and whatever is from that novel and whatever is completely new and original for that guy.
Hoth Hangout says, hello there, lads. Hello, Hoth Hangout. Hopefully you're having a good night. Diet Pro Ferris says, sorry for the typos. No worries. Hopefully when you wake up and you get to see us answer your question. Brandon Tran says, does Insomniac's Wolverine game look good so far based off the trailer? I think it looks good. I'm intrigued to see if it's a game that follows more of a linear path. I mean, that's kind of what it looks like from the trailer, is that you're going to be going to a bunch of different locations. I'm wondering, is that more, because you don't see games like that too often that aren't shooters. So is that more like Uncharted-esque, where you have locations that you can kind of backtrack and go through, almost like Jedi Fallen Order kind of was, where, yeah, it was, it was an open location, you had a map, but like you weren't encouraged to explore nearly as much as something that's open world. So I'm intrigued by that. I think combat looks really cool. It looks very much so like, and I'm probably one of the few people that actually played this, the X-Men Origins Wolverine game from the Xbox 360 that was so much better than the film. And the combat, all of it looks similar. I'm wondering if this is going to be hack and slash or a little bit more Spider-Man-esque. Like, I mean, it's the same company that makes Spider-Man PS4 and PS5. So I'm wondering if it's going to be a little bit more like that, which is Arkham combat inspired. So is it, counters and attacks and different special moves, or is it going to be more hack and slash like the last Wolverine game was from the 360 era, the Wolverine Origins game? Hack and slash makes more sense for Wolverine, but it's also like, his claws should be tearing people up. So how do you do that realistically to where you're still having that combat? And they don't show too much actual in-game combat. They show a lot of like finishers and stuff throughout the trailer, but they don't necessarily show any like full combat scenes. So I'm looking forward to seeing that as we get more into it. But yeah, it looks like it's going to be fun. Looks like a cool story, good mix of Wolverine styles from, comics to films. The designs, the costumes. That's always been one of the most fun parts of the Insomniac Spider-Man games is all the comic stuff they bring in, all the costumes and the homages and all that type of stuff. So looking forward to that. And I just like a little bit more of the deep cut X-Men stuff. Not necessarily deep cut, but like non-film X-Men stuff that's coming into this game a little bit more too. Like Omega Red looks like he's going to be a big villain. So that's kind of cool. And then Mystique's in it and Sentinels and stuff like that. So you're going to get your classic X-Men stuff. And hopefully this leads to maybe an X-Men game one day, or at least a variation of that as we, push into the next phase of the MCU where X-Men are supposed to be big. Maybe we'll get an X-Men game as well. So looked pretty cool. I'm excited for it.
Yeah, I know. I'm very excited for it. I've never been a huge fan of like the models in the Insomniac Spider-Man games. I found like the final design for Miles Morales in that game and that suit that he has. I'm like, why? This just doesn't. It doesn't work for me, right? But I'm liking all the looks of the characters. That was always one thing that's always kind of held me back from the Insomniac games. I'm like, I've heard great things about it. Just that certain character models, just like I just don't really love, and I think they've because there's like a little bit more pulpiness inherent to everything that's going around with X-Men and Mystique, and going with a little bit more of that the classic sensibility of these characters. We're also now in an era, right? Like when Spider-Man first came out, that was like 10 years ago almost now. Oh, not 10 years, but like 6, 7 years ago, right? But we're still in an era where we're dealing with like, hey, we want to have like modern, ultimate Marvel style designs translated. The world is a little bit more cynical now than it was even 10 years ago. And anytime the world gets a little darker, for some reason, our media and our comics kind of get a little bit more brighter and flashier. And the X-Men are just perfectly situated to like deal with heavier topics, but also be like, hey, look at my awesome yellow jumpsuit that has cool designs and all that, right? So seeing Mystique not in like the 2000s Fox X-Men look, but more like a comics look, I'm very excited for that. I love seeing a little bit more of a comic accurate Wolverine height. He doesn't necessarily look like 5'1", 5'2", or 5'3". He looks a little bit more like 5'7", 5'8", which I'm like, that's fine, right? Like we don't need to have a Hugh Jackman height, right? Even though he's almost become like the iconic look for that character now. But he's got a look that his suit almost looks like the Deadpool and Wolverine X-Men suit for him. A little less 97, a little bit more like, hey, like you just saw this movie last summer, right? Like don't forget, right? So I'm liking what we're seeing. It feels like a mix of the 70s, 80s comic looks that were going on, the Jim Lee stuff, but also like blending in the stuff that's been slowly adapted more and more. Rivals did the same thing. It brought a lot of hype around for the Fantastic Four. Obviously, that film didn't do super, super big, but it still outgrossed the last Fantastic Four by quite a bit, and the original two by quite a bit as well. Much better critical reception. They're going to be big characters in Doomsday. And the fact that this is coming out fall 2026, and we know that Doomsday is coming out like December, right? Like this could be a nice little gateway like drug for people being like, hey, like I want to get my little fix of that. And X-Men 97 season 2 is going to come out probably next year too. And it's just like, all right, like all this will feel like a nice little ramp up to classic looking suits while knowing that we are getting the original Fox actors back for Doomsday, and they're gonna at least wear designs much closer to the cartoons, to the comics. So having this be also its own interpretation of that and getting people hyped for it, yeah, gets me excited. And I like that we don't have Sabretooth. I'll be honest. I think Sabretooth's just been a miss for a long time for me, to the fact that I think one of its better depictions since, unfortunately, Origins is probably what we saw in Deadpool and Wolverine, just playing him as a joke. But yeah, I like Omega Red. The X-Men have had such a huge staple of villains and heroes and anti-heroes. Like, why haven't we actually explored that so much? And as much as I like the Sentinel design and Days of Future Past, I do like seeing the classic design be brought back here and feel both modern but still very like tactile. So very excited all around. This might be a game that I might play even before Spider-Man 1. Probably not. I probably played the PC ports of 1, 2, and Miles Morales, but the fact that they're also going to be in a shared universe, I'm very curious if they're going to have any connectivity at all.
I would hope so. The X-Men are one of the few Marvel groups of characters that's not New York only based.
Right.
So, so it's nice to be able to go to other locations. The trailer shows a lot of location hopping. That's why I'm really intrigued to see like what's the style of the way you move through maps, because it looks like when it shows like the snow, and then jumping through kind of a, a s- like a old rundown village. It looks like something that could be a little bit more Fallen Order esque in terms of its traversal, like climbing and traversing different areas, but it's not necessarily open world. It kind of holds your hand and guides you to certain directions, and I think that would be a fairly good place to take this. So I don't know. It looks really cool. Can't wait to see more. Still have a year, probably over a year before it comes out, but definitely looking forward to it. So thanks for that question, Brandon. Hoth Hangout says, "Oh, X-Men game would be incredible. Spent many quarters at the arcade on the old school X-Men game. Who else misses arcades? I do for sure. I actually, so I didn't play that when it came out, obviously, but I did spend quite a few quarters playing the version they had, or the remastered version they had of that, um, at the Santa Cruz Beach Boardwalk when I was growing up. They had that and Ninja Turtles. I forgot what it was called on arcade, but on SNES it was Turtles in Time, which I also have the cartridge for that. But I love those types of games. Those like beat 'em up versions of X-Men. Man, miss those. So we have Brandon Tran who says thoughts on Peacemaker season 2 episode 6 if you've seen the huge major plot twist. Yeah, I'm not going to reveal it for everybody. I know a lot of people have seen it probably on social media, but not going to reveal it if you haven't seen it. But yeah, I was definitely surprised. Um, I can't wait to see where they go with it in the next episode, because Peacemaker is just consistently bonkers, and very intrigued to see how this season finishes. So yeah, that's all I'll say, I guess.
I haven't seen it yet, but I like spoiling myself before I get into franchises like this, right? But yeah, I think just from the little context clues that they've been dropping throughout each episode, like the little Easter eggs, pronunciations per se, like I think it was obvious, but I think from what I'm hearing, it's people are like, yeah, it might have been obvious by the point that we finally got to it, but how it played out and the performances, especially of Holland, like people are like, wow, just Peacemaker becoming like an essential part of the early DCU was not on my cards, even if it was handled under the DCU EU banner at first by James Gunn. But I'm glad this guy might have been strained by doing Peacemaker and Creature Commandos, and that one's a little bit more mixed for people, and Superman. And the next real test is really Lanterns and stuff like that, like other people's voices in the universe moving forward. But if you can make a Peacemaker work, I think you can make a lot of things work in this DCU that feels very grounded, but also feel very fantastical and just irreverent in a way that maybe Marvel hasn't necessarily landed in the last few years.
I can't wait to see the last two episodes. Really looking forward to seeing where it goes. I think, Ryan, you'll have to be our last question here for tonight as we wrap up our stream. But thanks to everybody who stuck with us and enjoyed the stream tonight. Hopefully, you're all having a great evening. Do you think Mandalorian and Grogu will have an opening crawl? And will the credits use concept art like in the show or the classic blue text? I think little things like this can help the movie feel more cinematic. Yeah, I absolutely agree with you, Ryan. I think that's something I know Sonic and I have had conversations about. I can't remember if it was on camera or not, but that is a big deal, because really the only Star Wars movie that hasn't had some semblance of a crawl was Rogue One. Like Clone Wars had the recap battle report kind of thing that you saw in every version of the Clone Wars, as well as your inspirational quote. You had a kind of backstory, not crawl, but text base. Reminded me more of Blade Runner, with Solo Star Wars story. So we've always had this kind of exposition dump text blocks at the beginning of Star Wars projects, except for Rogue One. That was the only one we didn't have it. Mandalorian has yet to do anything like that. But I agree. I think a crawl, especially just I think more so than even the crawl, the Star Wars logo coming onto screen with the classic John Williams main title theme, just that alone is the number one thing I think every Star Wars movie should do now. From now on, you should at least have that. Whether you want to do a full crawl or not, I think that's still up for debate. I personally would say let's do it. I think it's something that's, doesn't detract from your movie whatsoever. It only helps the audience who hasn't seen the other stuff know what's going on. Like, there's no real negative to it other than like preserving the idea of an episode 10, 11, 12, and beyond having something special. But I do think the Star Wars intro with the main title music, all that, it's so iconic. It does every Star Wars film I've seen, whether it be re-releases, I mean, in theaters, whether it be re-releases like Revenge of the Sith this year or Phantom Menace last year to the new ones with the sequel films, or even when I saw Revenge of the Sith originally in theaters in 2005 or Clone Wars, when you have that Star Wars logo come on, it's every time a cheer moment, like everybody in the theaters clapping. And I think that is something that Star Wars does better than almost any franchise or has in the past. And we talked about this a little bit that last week, is that multi-generational thing that Star Wars has, that quality of multi-generational interest that Star Wars has that not very many other franchises have, at least as a film-based franchise, right? There are, I mean, many generations have loved DC and Marvel comics. Many generations have loved different books that have been adapted, like Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings. But you don't have a film-first franchise that's multi-generational to the point where it's almost 50 years old now, that unites an audience in the cinema the way Star Wars has. And so I think Star Wars needs to have those little staples. It'll just be the little things that let the audience know, hey, you're watching a Star Wars movie, not a show. So I think they have to have the Star Wars logo. I don't know if they have to have the crawl, but I would like at least a variation of the crawl, and I would love to see how Ludwig Göransson combines the main title sequence music with eventually merging it into the Mandalorian theme, which should play as maybe the crawl wraps up, and then you get the Mandalorian and Grogu like logo, and then you pan down to the Razor Crest or whatever we see first. But yeah, I think those little hallmarks of Star Wars, they can be kind of ridiculous to some people, but I think those are the things that for a lot of us Star Wars fans at least makes us feel a little bit more Star Wars. Like I remember when The Force Awakens was coming out and when all those movies were coming out, you're predicting, okay, how is C3PO and R2D2 going to show up in the movie because they're in all the Star Wars movies? How are they going to say, I have a bad feeling about this? How are they going to, do the crawl? How are they going to do these little moments that just, bring Star Wars to life? And I'm not saying all those things have to be back, but if they could end with an iris, if they can begin with the Star Wars logo, I think those are minor things that don't really affect the Mandalorian as a piece, that would absolutely help improve. But I would be shocked if Starfighter doesn't have all that. Mandalorian, I
Yeah.
think, is only up for in the air because it has a precedent, like you said earlier. The concept art um, is kind of iconic part of the endings of Mandalorian episodes. So we'll see if they do that versus the blue text. I'm not as partial to like the ending, although I would love some version of the Star Wars music at least morphed into whatever themes Goranson has in the beginning and the end.
Yeah, not to add too much more to it, but I believe Kathleen has said like that is now a thing that every Star Wars show, every movie, now we realize like that's a crucial thing. We're gonna have it. So I'm excited for that. I know we saw it in Ahsoka, I saw it in Acolyte. Set up the stage. That's all it really has to do, right? It doesn't have to be anything magnificent of a story. Like, Hot Hangout says the dead speak, right? Like, it's not like the movies themselves and Skywalker Saga have necessarily had the craziest like sentence structure, right? And one of my favorites is just war, right? From Revenge of the Sith. It's just a great way to start it, right? So I think it's a crucial part. I think it should happen. I think it will happen moving forward. How it'll happen for Mando will be interesting. Like Liam said, like will we combine the Star Wars theme into Ludwig's themes for the Mandalorian? Right? Is it gonna be a little bit different now that Grogu is it's Mandalorian and Grogu? Like how are we gonna pan down from it? Are we gonna even pan down it? Is it gonna be more like how Ahsoka and Acolyte handle it, or it's just a starry background and just dark text, right? I, I think it'll be good to maybe incorporate some of that imagery, especially like as a way to get people like to see the concept art and appreciate that, but also be like, hey, this is stuff that we saw, and I have memories of from a couple years ago and during COVID watches and all that, and gets you like a little bit of a setup. It'll be hard though to combine opening text with concept art. I think concept art can still have its place and in the ending credits, but having it in the opening might be a little too hard. I think the opening you can still just like do a bunch of like mini recaps of like the first 3 seasons and Book of Boba Fett, and maybe if we're lucky, Skeleton Crew and Ahsoka, right? And then jump into what's necessary for just this story. And I don't think you need to do too much. You just need to do the first 3 seasons and the Manda 2.5 episodes, to be honest.
Well, that's going to wrap up our stream tonight, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. To all the people in the chat tonight, to all the people who have just watched and enjoyed the content. We appreciate you guys. We appreciate you joining us. Make sure you hit the like button if you haven't. It really helps out our stream. So make sure you do that. Just scroll down, hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. Join us every Tuesday for our live streams and Q&As. Again, you don't have to ask Star Wars questions. You can bring whatever you want. So it's a fun time. We always enjoy it, getting to know our audience and you guys getting to know us a little bit better. So make sure you join us every single week. Let us know if you are watching on replay, what your thoughts are on any of the topics. Let us know in the comments about that. Thank you so much for watching the stream tonight, everybody. And we will see you all next week.